Hi! So it's been a while, and I feel very awkward filming again because it's been probably 2-3 months since I've sat down and filmed. So I'll give a quick life update. If you really don't care about this life update and you just want to skip to the books, I will make sure to bookmark where that begins down below so you can skip ahead if you'd like. But for those of you who are curious as to where I've been, as you can see, I am in a completely different room than I'm normally in. That is because for the past several months I've been staying at my parents' house with my husband and baby, and the reason being we are currently in the process of building a house. And that house has been delayed for many a reason, so we will be staying at my parents' house for quite a bit longer than we originally anticipated, which is what it is. This is a great place to be while we wait for the house to finish being built, but it has caused some changes in routine, and it has not been as easy to find the time to film. Another update is that I started a new job last year, as I'm sure many of you are aware if you watched some of my videos last year, and that job has just been extremely busy, and it has been a lot harder to find time. At the end of the day, I am completely exhausted from work, and I have to go right to watching my daughter, who is now 19 months old, so she is running around. She's fantastic. We love her, but she's a handful, so that has been keeping me very, very busy. And I've not been reading quite as much as I used to, and I just have not had the time to read, let alone film, as much as I've wanted to. Last update is a couple months ago, we found out I am pregnant again, which was very, very exciting. We definitely wanted our two little ones close in age, so it was a huge blessing to find that out. And so I am now in my second trimester. I am due this summer, but that has also added a certain level of exhaustion and other symptoms as well that has just made it hard to sit down and film. So all of that being said, hi, I am back. I am going to try to make sure this sticks and that I actually am starting to film more often now. I know last video I said I was back and then I didn't post for a while, so I really, really would love to make it a priority to come back and start filming. I miss it so much. I miss this community. I miss talking to you all. I can't promise a certain schedule or a certain number of videos a week, but I can tell you I'm going to do my best to try and make it a priority. So that is where I have been. Now I will start talking about all of the books that I read last year. I missed out on the opportunity to do all of the end of year wrap-up videos, but I really, really wanted to have a video dedicated to looking back at last year at all of the incredible books I read. I read so many good books. So this video, I'm going through all of my 4.5 and 5-star books that I read. If I were to go into detail on all of them, this video would be a movie length video. So what I'm going to do instead is for all of the 4.5 stars, I'm just going to show them up on the screen. But for all of the 5-star books, those I will go into a little bit more of my thoughts on and a little bit more detail on why I love them so much, who I recommend them for, etc. So that is the goal for today's video. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting with all of the 4.5-star books. So I loved these so much. They just had maybe one tiny thing that prevented them from being an all-time favorite in that 5-star read, but I still love them and recommend them to everyone nonetheless. That is Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan, The Spider by Leo Carew, Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Gyasi, Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, The Passengers by John Mars, The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James, Firefly Lane by Kristin Hannah, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, The Unsinkable Greta James by Jennifer E. Smith, Fireborn by Rosaria Munda, Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell, In a Holidays by Kristin Lauren, and Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey. Hey, excuse the outfit change. It is now another day because I ran out of time on the previous day I started this video on. So we left off, I was about to talk about all of my 5-star books. So these are in chronological order. I'm not trying to rank these in any way. That would be very difficult to do. So starting with the book I read first from last year that was 5 stars is The Push by Ashley Audrain. I loved this really twisted psychological thriller. If you like examining mother-child relationships, motherhood, themes around that, but in a really dark and twisted way, this is a great book. I love those types of books, even though I find them terrifying and disturbing. It was something where the way the author wrote these characters really made you feel for them. I just remember that book sticking with me for so long afterwards. I loved it, but this is definitely not going to be for everyone. It's very dark and twisted. If you like these types of psychological thrillers that center around children and motherhood, I think that this is a great one. The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart was my next 5-star. This one was a fantasy book that had all of the right elements for me and my personal preference and what I look for in fantasy. It had a really unique world that I thought was really, really well done, and the world building was done in a very organic way where you're definitely trying to figure it out alongside some of the characters. It had great animal companion aspect, which I loved, and then it had a really cool hard magic system that I loved exploring. So all of those things combined make this a 5-star read for me. I loved it. The sequel, not quite as much as the first one, but I'm still so excited for the 3rd book this year. We'll definitely be prioritizing that one because if it sticks the landing, I can see this potentially being a favorite series for me. Runaway by Harlan Coben. This is one that was completely unexpected. I picked it up on a whim. I had heard of this author. He's one of those very prolific mystery writers, the types of books that you see in airports, just always publishing new books. So he has a huge backlist to work from, and I randomly picked up Runaway after seeing it in a couple of new release videos several years ago. It took me by complete surprise. I was not expecting to love it as much as I did, and can see why this writer is so popular and is so prolific. So the pacing of this one was one where the moment I started it, I couldn't put it down. It's about a father looking for his runaway daughter who's getting into some really dark and seedy things and gets wrapped up in this bigger conspiracy, and he has to work out all of the pieces of this mystery in order to save her. It's so good. I loved the characters. I loved the interpersonal relationships between this family and just how far this father was willing to go to save his daughter. I just loved it. So this is one where I definitely want to check out more by this author now because this was a 5-star easy read for me. I could not put it down. Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. It was one I picked up based on Alan from the Library of Alexandria's recommendation and loved it. This is one that's a standalone fantasy, which we love to see. We love getting a standalone, great, epic fantasy that doesn't bog you down with a huge series. So that was something that was really appealing about this one. But what I loved so much about this one was the tone of it felt very much like a Jane Austen novel and character, but put into a military fantasy book. So it had this really cool tone and atmosphere around it, and the main character of Emily is one of my all-time favorite protagonists now. I just loved her, and there's a romance subplot that I thought was very Pride and Prejudice-esque. It felt very much like Jane Austen in a military fantasy. It was so good, and I loved all of the politicking, the military tactics. I love that kind of stuff. I'm starting to realize maybe I do really like military fantasy. I kind of find it fascinating, so maybe I should start to pick more up in that subgenre, but this one was a total hit for me. I loved it from start to finish. The ending of this one was perfection, and because it's a standalone, I was really hoping it would stick the landing. It totally did. I highly recommend this one to any type of reader, but especially if you like military fantasy that focuses a lot on battle tactics, but it's more about the soldiers with boots on the ground rather than the people behind the scenes pulling the strings. It's really, really good, and the themes around it of how do you know whether or not you're fighting for the right thing and whose version of the truth is real. It's just so good. So I loved this book, highly recommend. The Love Hypothesis by Hazelwood. I picked this one up because it was so hyped and I loved it. I don't know how much I can add to the conversation around this one. It's not going to be for everyone, but I loved how cute and sweet this romance was. It was very fluffy, fun. I loved it. And I loved the fact that it's centered around science and this kind of STEM atmosphere was really cool. The two main characters I loved. I loved the grumpy main love interest. I loved the protagonist we followed, and all of the shenanigans they get into are sometimes over the top, but I was just grinning from ear to ear the entire read through this book, so I loved it, but I know not everyone does. Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. This is a memoir I picked up and was just blown away by the writing in it. I loved the way Ashley C. Ford reflected on her past. It's a memoir about this woman who grew up with the looming absence of her incarcerated father and her going on this journey to kind of figure out who she is, but also come to terms with who her father is. And it's just really beautifully told. And I loved kind of the more intimate tone this one took. If you're a fan of memoirs, I think that this one could be really good for you. And especially if you like audiobooks, the author herself reads the audiobook, which just added to the experience for me. So I loved this. The Maid by Nita Prose. This is one I've seen a lot of mixed reviews for, but it worked so well for me because of one main thing, which is the main character of Molly the Maid. She is one of my favorite characters I've ever read about, ever. And her relationship with the other characters in this book, it's a murder mystery. It's a very cozy murder mystery book about Molly the Maid, who is a little bit, she's neurodivergent, but it's not clearly stated in what way on the text, but you kind of follow her perspective as she gets wrapped up into this murder that happens at the hotel that she cleans at, and her kind of view on the world is very different from everyone around her, and so she's kind of targeted as a suspect in this murder and has to rely on other people to help her kind of solve this mystery, get out of it, and it is just so beautifully told. I just love the main character so much, and she has this amazing relationship with her grandmother that had me in tears by the end. It was so good. So I just love this for the character work. The murder mystery itself, I would say don't go into this book wanting like a fantastic murder mystery. I don't think that that's the strength of this book. I really think it's more about appreciating the character work if it works for you, because it totally worked for me. The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. This is my third or fourth 5-star book by Kristin Hannah at this point. She's definitely an auto-buy author for me. This one was a time period I had never read anything about. It takes place during the time of the Dust Bowl, and it follows a family in Texas who owns a farm and is kind of forced to go on this journey to find greener lands, if you will, because of the weather during this time and being on this farm, everything dying. So it's just this really beautiful story of a resilient young woman who's a mother and is doing her best for her kids and is just wanting a better life for her and them, and it's beautiful. I loved it. And Kristin Hannah always has such emotional books that take you on such a roller coaster ride, but her character work is always what impresses me so much and leaves such an impression with me because her main female characters are always so strong, so resilient, and I love them for it. So I highly recommend this one if you like other Kristin Hannah books. Again, it's very sad, so just be warned. It is very emotional, but it's, I think, worth it, and the journey is very beautiful. Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This is a middle grade book I picked up based on all of the hype I was hearing about it, and I'm so glad I did. This is fantastic. This is, for me, what I was hoping middle grade would be. It's the perfect blend of whimsical, fun, fantasy, and magic mixed with really beautiful themes and characters, and I just think it is a perfect middle grade fantasy. For me, this is my favorite that I've read since I've tried to start this middle grade journey. It's fun, yet it has really important things to say, and the characters are great, and the friendships are great, and so I love it for that reason. I can't wait to continue on with the series. I'm currently reading the sequel book, and it's already great, so I can just tell that this is gonna be a favorite middle grade for me, and kind of unfairly is what I'm going to compare other middle grade fantasy books to when I'm looking for this kind of feel, because it's so cozy, it's so fun, and it just reminds me, it like takes me back to that time in my life where I was a kid and had all these adventures with friends. So it's just a great time. Flamefall by Rosaria Munda. I read the entire Aurelian cycle last year, and I will say Flamefall, the second book, is my favorite, but I loved all three books. I think that the trilogy is fantastic. It's a young adult fantasy trilogy about a post-revolutionary society that has dragons in it, so that's fantastic if you like dragons. There's plenty of them in this series. But what I loved so much about this book is it takes two sides of a revolution, and it examines so closely both sides and kind of makes you feel sympathetic to both sides, so that when you're looking at kind of this post-revolution society and looking at how a revolution can impact everything, so fascinating and so well done, and it's just really well thought out. You can tell that this author really has done her work and her research and knows how to examine these things in a really sophisticated way, and the character work is really well done and just kind of lends itself so well to examining even deeper what this can do to children and people who grow up in this type of post-revolutionary society. So it's just so good. And for a YA fantasy, I feel like it really can lean very much on the upper end of YA, almost into adult, because of the level of sophistication it goes into to explore these themes. I highly recommend this one to anyone. I think younger readers can get a lot out of it, but I think even adults who only read adult fantasy can also get a lot out of it. It's just fantastic. Educated by Tara Westover is another memoir I listened to. I think I'm liking memoirs a lot. I need to read more of them because I always tend to really enjoy them. This one was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe this journey that Tara had to go on. She comes from a family that lives in very rural United States. I forget exactly where. It's like Pacific, Montana. I forget exactly where, but she lives in a very rural area, really nothing around, and her family is very anti anything government. So they don't have birth certificates, they don't go to school, they really just stay at home, and that's all they know. And her growing up in this type of family, all she wanted was a formal education. She just wanted a higher education. She wanted to go to college. So it examines a lot of like her childhood and how it was growing up in this family, but then also her kind of breaking free of this family to pursue that higher education. And it's just so fascinating. Like, I just couldn't believe some of the stuff that she went through being a part of this family. And it's kind of like this very bittersweet ending. So I can see why this is so hyped and so popular and so highly rated. It's just really beautifully told, and the things she went through are, you just have to read it to believe it, because it's crazy. I've never read anything like this, so I highly recommend this one. I think it's just a remarkable story of resilience and strength and bravery. Really, really good. I'm so glad I read it. Heir of Novron by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the third and final bind-up of the 5th and 6th book in the Rhaeria Revelations. This was my favorite by far. I think I really liked the climax of this series, the reveals, even though because I had read Legends of the First Empire, I could see a lot of the reveals coming. I still really, really loved all of that payoff that we've been building up towards. And I just love this world so, so much. I think that these characters aren't quite as strong as the characters are in Legends of the First Empire, at least for me. I've seen a lot of people kind of have this opposite reaction where they really like Rhaeria and then Legends doesn't hit quite as hard for them. But for me, Heir of Novron was fantastic. I still do prefer Legends of the First Empire as a whole, but I thought that the ending of this series was epic, bringing everything back around and answering all of the questions we've been waiting for, and the big reveals were just so much fun. And then the second to last thing I have to talk about is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is one I read at the very, very end of the year, and my goodness, it was so much fun. It is the perfect amount of paranormal in a thriller that I love. I was fully going into this book expecting paranormal elements, and thank goodness it delivered, because I really don't like when a book does kind of market itself or advertise itself as having paranormal elements and then it's very, very light on those. Not a huge fan. I think that this did a really good job. It has like a book within a book aspect to it, which I think added so much of the fun that I was looking for from this book. It had all the creepy vibes. It had the creepy paranormal haunted house. I just thought it was really well done, and it was very cleverly told with the book within a book aspect, where it switches between chapters from a book that a family had written and then the daughter of that family actually trying to figure out the mystery behind that book. It just did that so well. Loved this. I had so much fun with it. I could not put it down. Highly recommend this one. This is my favorite Riley Sager that I've read by far. And then finally, I'm just going to talk about a whole series, and if you've watched my channel at all this past year, you will know what this is going to be. This is by far the favorite thing that I read in 2022. When I look back, this will be what defines that year, and it's Legends of the First Empire. I mentioned it already, but it is just one of my favorite fantasy series of all time, if not my favorite of all time at this point. And really, the world building is amazing. I love the world building. I love how it's this classic fantasy feel of like elves, dwarves, humans, but it's told in a very modern writing style and has a refreshing kind of twist on it that doesn't make it feel so derivative or so like other fantasy books. So I love the world building, but I also just love the cast of characters so much. There's not one character that I thought was poorly done. Like every character, even if I didn't love that character, I still thought that they were well written. And most of my favorite fantasy protagonists now come from this cast of characters. So that was by far my favorite thing about this series. I cried multiple times through this series. I thought the emotional gut punches that Michael J. Sullivan puts in his books are so impactful, and I just loved it. I loved this series. So looking back, my favorite book in the series is Age of War because of some of the emotional punches in that book and the ending of that one really being so incredibly epic. But overall, like this whole series is 5 stars for me, my favorite, because of its characters. It's so good. So I have to thank Joshana for being the one to recommend it to me and getting me to read it sooner than I ever would have, because it is my new favorite. So thank you, Joshana. So those are all of the 5-star books that I read last year and the 4.5-star books. Did you see any on this list that you also loved? And then what were your favorite books that you read in 2022? I would love to know, so leave those comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.